When Caleb Turner returned to Black Hollow, nobody called him by his name. They called him Ruth's boy. 22 years earlier, his mother had died inside the old white house at the end of Mill Road. The house nobody wanted. The house people crossed the street to avoid. The house church ladies said still smelled like smoke and sin. At the county auction, the building was listed as abandoned property. A burned house. A dead woman's house. A house full of shame. The auctioneer opened the bidding at $5,000. Caleb sat in the back row wearing a black coat and a face no one could read. Then he raised his hand. 50,000. The room went quiet. A burned house in Black Hollow was not worth $50,000. The pastor lowered his eyes. The retired sheriff stopped chewing his gum, and Caleb's aunt, sitting near the front, whispered one word. No. Caleb looked at them and smiled for the first time. Then he said, I'm not buying the house. I'm buying what it remembers. Black Hollow was the kind of town that looked forgotten, even when people still lived there. It sat between old coal roads, gray hills, and a river that carried more trash than fish. The factories had closed. The mines had slowed. The young people left if they could. The old people stayed because leaving required money. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody remembered everything, and nobody told the whole truth. Caleb Turner had been born there. His mother, Ruth Turner, cleaned rooms at the motel, washed dishes at the diner, and sang softly in the back pew of Grace Road Church every Sunday morning. She had one son, no husband, no savings, and no protection. But she had pride. Ruth was poor, but she was clean. Poor, but careful. Poor, but honest. She wore the same blue coat every winter and kept Caleb's school shoes polished, even when there was nothing in the fridge but milk and bread. People said Ruth had nothing, but Caleb remembered differently. He remembered her hands. He remembered her singing. He remembered the way she stood in front of him when grown people talked down to her. He remembered how she used to say, "Baby, poverty can sit at our table, but it will never sleep in our hearts." Before the town destroyed Ruth Turner, she was not famous. She was not powerful. She was not educated in the way people respect on paper. But she was the kind of woman people trusted when their children needed watching, when old women needed groceries, when sick neighbors needed soup, and when church events needed cleaning after everyone else had gone home. At Grace Road Church, Ruth volunteered every Thursday night. She counted donation envelopes. She washed coffee cups. She folded blankets for the winter drive. She helped pack food boxes for poor families. She never asked for praise. She only asked that no child in Black Hollow should go hungry while the church had money in its collection box. That was the first mistake Ruth made. She believed kindness was stronger than greed. Her second mistake was that she could read numbers. It started with the Christmas fund. Every December, Grace Road Church collected money for struggling families. People gave cash. Old widows gave coins. Children gave dollar bills. Workers gave what little they could. The pastor announced that the church had raised enough to help 15 families, but only 6 food boxes were delivered, Ruth noticed. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Then she checked the numbers again. The donation envelopes did not match the ledger. The ledger did not match the bank deposit. The bank deposit did not match what the pastor announced. Money was missing. Not once. Not twice. For years. Ruth stayed late in the church basement, going through boxes of old records while snow tapped against the windows. That night, she found names. Pastor Elias Monroe, Sheriff Wade Harlan, her own sister Diane, Ruth's hands started shaking, because the money had not only been stolen, it had been stolen from poor families, families like hers. Ruth did not run to the police. In Black Hollow, the police meant Sheriff Harlan, and Sheriff Harlan's name was in the records. So she went to Pastor Monroe. She believed that if a man stood behind a pulpit every Sunday and spoke about God, maybe shame would still find him. Pastor Monroe listened without moving. Ruth laid the papers on his desk. She told him she had made copies. She told him she knew. She told him the money had to be returned. The pastor's face did not change. Then Sheriff Harlan stepped out from the side office. Ruth froze. Diane, Ruth's older sister, stood by the door, crying before anyone had even accused her. Pastor Monroe said softly, "Ruth, you don't understand what you're holding." Ruth answered, "I understand exactly what I'm holding." Sheriff Harlan walked closer. "Then you should understand what happens when a woman with your reputation starts making wild accusations." Ruth looked at her sister. Diane wiped her eyes and whispered, "I told you to leave it alone." That was the moment Ruth realized she was not facing one liar. She was facing a wall. The following Sunday, Pastor Monroe preached a sermon called "When Judas Sits Among Us." He never said Ruth's name. He did not have to. He spoke about betrayal. He spoke about stolen money. He spoke about people who smile in church while stealing from God. By Monday morning, the whole town knew the story. Ruth Turner had stolen from the Christmas fund. By Tuesday, the diner fired her. By Wednesday, mothers told their children not to speak to Caleb. By Thursday, someone spray-painted thief on her front door. By Friday, Sheriff Harlan visited her house and told her it would be better if she stopped making trouble. Ruth kept saying she was innocent. Nobody listened. Because in a town like Black Hollow, truth did not matter as much as who said it first. Caleb was 9 years old when his mother became the town's favorite sin. At school, they called him Thief Boy. At the grocery store, people counted their change twice when Ruth passed. At church, the women who once hugged her moved their purses to the other side of the pew. Caleb did not understand ledgers. He did not understand bank deposits. He did not understand adult cowardice. He only understood that his mother cried quietly at night and smiled loudly in the morning, so he would not be afraid. One evening, Caleb asked her, "Mom, did you take the money?" Ruth knelt in front of him. She held his face in both hands and said, "No, baby, but sometimes people bury the truth so deep they forget God can still see the ground." Caleb never forgot that. After the accusation, Ruth changed. Not in public. In public, she kept her back straight. But inside the house, she started moving like someone who could hear footsteps before they arrived. She made copies of everything: bank slips, donation records, a list of missing food pantry deliveries, names, dates, amounts. She borrowed a small cassette recorder from an old neighbor and recorded herself telling the truth. Then one night, Caleb woke up and saw her in the kitchen. The cabinet under the sink was open. A loose piece of wall was pulled back. Ruth was pushing a metal cookie tin into the space behind it. Caleb rubbed his eyes. "Mom?" Ruth turned quickly. For a second, she looked scared. Then she came to him, held him tightly, and whispered, "If anything happens to me, don't forget this house." Caleb did not understand. She kissed his forehead and said, "The walls know who killed me." 3 weeks later, the house burned. It happened on a January night so cold that the firemen's breath looked like ghosts. The official story was simple. Ruth had been drinking. Ruth had knocked over a heater. Ruth had caused her own death. But Caleb remembered something the report never mentioned. He remembered standing in the hallway before the smoke swallowed the ceiling. He remembered his mother shouting his name. He remembered a man's boot near the back door. He remembered the smell of gasoline. And he remembered Sheriff Harlan carrying him outside, gripping his arm so hard it left bruises. The sheriff told him, "You were asleep. You didn't see anything." Caleb looked back at the burning house and screamed for his mother until his voice broke. By morning, Ruth Turner was dead. By noon, the town had already decided she had done it to herself. Ruth's funeral lasted 14 minutes. Pastor Monroe did not call her innocent. He did not call her kind. He did not call her a mother who deserved mercy. He said, "Only God knows the heart." Then he closed his Bible. Diane stood beside Caleb wearing black gloves and a face full of practiced grief. She told everyone she would take care of the boy. But 2 weeks later, Caleb was placed into foster care. Diane said she could not afford another mouth. That was what she told the town. What she did not tell them was that she had already received money for helping make Ruth disappear from the church records, from the sheriff's files, and from Black Hollow's memory. Caleb left with one plastic bag. Inside it were 2 shirts, a cracked toy car, and a photo of his mother standing in front of the house that killed her. 22 years passed. Caleb Turner grew up in rooms that never belonged to him. Foster homes, group homes, cheap apartments, college dorms, office towers. He learned early that nobody was coming to save him, so he saved himself. He worked construction after school. He studied at night. He learned real estate from men who thought he was only there to carry boxes. He watched. He listened. He built. By 31, Caleb owned properties in 3 states. People called him disciplined, cold, focused, brilliant. But Caleb did not feel successful. He felt unfinished. Every year, on the anniversary of the fire, he dreamed of his mother's voice. The walls know who killed me. Then one morning, a letter arrived from Black Hollow County. The old house on Mill Road was being auctioned for unpaid taxes. Caleb stared at the address. For 22 years, he had tried not to remember. Now, the house was calling him back. The auction room smelled like dust, coffee, and old fear. Everyone looked up when Caleb walked in. Some recognized his eyes before they recognized his face. Ruth's boy. The whisper moved through the room like a draft. Pastor Monroe was older now, his hair white, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on his cane. Sheriff Harlan had retired, but he still wore authority like an old coat. Diane sat near the front, pretending she had not seen Caleb. The auctioneer read the property description. Single-family residence, fire damaged, structural issues. Sold as is. A man in the back laughed. Should be paying us to take it. The auctioneer opened at $5,000. Before anyone else could speak, Caleb raised his hand. $50,000. The room froze. Diane turned around slowly. Pastor Monroe closed his eyes. Sheriff Harlan leaned forward. Caleb did not look at the house papers. He looked at them, and that was when they understood. He had not come home to remember. He had come home to dig. By the next morning, Caleb owned the house. By noon, the road was full of trucks, a structural engineer, 2 contractors, a private investigator, a lawyer, a local news van someone had called out of curiosity. Black Hollow had ignored the house for 22 years. Now everyone wanted to know why Caleb Turner cared. Diane arrived first. She stepped out of her car, smiling the kind of smile people use when they are terrified. "Caleb," she said, "you should have called me." Caleb looked at her. "You should have kept me." Her smile died. Pastor Monroe arrived 10 minutes later. Sheriff Harlan came last. None of them crossed the yard. The old house stood between them and Caleb like a witness. Caleb walked to the porch, touched the burned door frame, and whispered, "I'm here, Mom." Then he turned to the workers. "Open the walls." At first, they found nothing. Ash, mouse nests, rotten insulation, old wires, broken glass. The town watched from the road, disappointed. Maybe Caleb was crazy. Maybe grief had turned him into a rich fool. Maybe the house had nothing left to say. Then a contractor working under the kitchen sink stopped. "Mr. Turner." Caleb stepped closer. Behind the lower cabinet was a narrow space sealed with a loose board. The board was burned at the edges, but still intact. Caleb's heart began to pound. He was 9 years old again, blanket in his hand, his mother on her knees, the cookie tin disappearing into the wall. The contractor pulled the board free. Inside was a rusted metal tin wrapped in plastic. For the first time since returning to Black Hollow, Caleb's hands shook. Inside the tin was the town's buried soul. Donation records, bank slips, handwritten notes, church envelopes, a list of families who never received help, copies of checks, a cassette tape, and a sealed letter with one word written across the front, Caleb. He did not open the letter first. He was afraid to. Instead, his lawyers spread the papers across the kitchen counter. The private investigator photographed everything. The records told a story colder than the fire. For years, money collected for the poor had been moved through fake expenses, false repairs, and emergency community relief accounts. The signatures appeared again and again. Pastor Elias Monroe, Sheriff Wade Harlan, Diane Mercer, Caleb's aunt. The church had stolen from the poor. The sheriff had protected it. His aunt had helped hide it. And Ruth had found out. Caleb stared at the cassette tape for a long time. The label was written in his mother's handwriting. "If they say I lied." His lawyer warned him they should preserve it properly. Caleb nodded. Then he pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then, Ruth Turner's voice filled the burned kitchen. Small, tired, alive. "My name is Ruth Elaine Turner. If anybody hears this, it means they finally stopped me from talking." Caleb closed his eyes. Outside, the people near the road stopped whispering. Ruth continued, "I did not steal from Grace Road Church. Pastor Monroe, Sheriff Harlan, and my sister Diane have been taking money from the Christmas fund, the food pantry, and the emergency rent box. I found the records. I made copies. I tried to give them a chance to return it." Her voice broke. "If something happens to me, please protect my son. His name is Caleb. He is 9 years old. He is all I have." Caleb covered his mouth. For 22 years, the town had called his mother a thief. Now her voice stood in the house and told them all who had lied. Caleb did not keep the tape inside. He carried the speaker to the porch. The same porch where someone had once painted thief across his mother's door. Then he played Ruth's voice loud enough for the road to hear. People came out of their cars. Neighbors stepped closer. Old women covered their mouths. Men who had mocked Ruth lowered their eyes. Ruth named every account, every missing amount, every person who helped bury the truth. Diane began to cry. Pastor Monroe shouted, "That is not legal evidence." Caleb looked at him and said, "No, it is my mother's voice." Sheriff Harlan stepped forward. "You don't know what you're doing, boy." Caleb smiled without warmth. "That's what you said when I was 9. The old sheriff stopped walking. Because he remembered. And now Caleb remembered too. Just when everyone thought the truth had reached its deepest point, a new voice rose from the crowd. Caleb. The man was old now, bent by years of work and silence. His name was Mr. Bell. He had been the school janitor when Caleb was a child. He had also cleaned the church on weekends. Caleb barely recognized him. Mr. Bell stepped forward, twisting his cap in his hands. "I saw your mother that night." The crowd went still. Caleb's lawyer moved closer. Mr. Bell looked at the burned house. "She came to the church after hours. She was scared. She said she had hidden copies in the house, said if anything happened, the proof would still be there." His voice trembled. "I also saw Sheriff Harlan leave the church with Pastor Monroe that same night. They were arguing. Your aunt was with them." Diane screamed, "Shut up!" Mr. Bell looked at her with tired eyes. "I kept quiet for 22 years. I'm done being afraid of people who use God to steal." Mr. Bell's confession cracked the town open. But the final piece came from Sheriff Harlan himself, not because he wanted to tell the truth, because guilt makes old men careless. He shouted that Ruth was unstable. He said she was going to destroy the church. He said people like her did not understand what leadership required. Caleb stepped down from the porch. "Leadership?" Harlan's face twisted. "We kept this town alive." Caleb pointed to the church records in his lawyer's hands. "You stole from hungry families." Harlan shouted, "Your mother should have stayed quiet." The words left his mouth before he could catch them. Everyone heard. The news camera heard. The lawyer heard. The town heard. And Caleb heard the sentence he had waited 22 years to hear. Not a full confession, but enough. Enough to show that Ruth had not imagined her enemies. Enough to show they had feared her. Enough to show that the fire had never been only a fire. Diane was the last wall. For years she had survived by telling herself she had only looked away. She did not light the fire. She did not steal the first dollar. She did not preach the sermon. She only signed papers. She only repeated what she was told. She only said Ruth was unstable. She only refused to take Caleb. She only chose herself. But truth does not care how people arrange their excuses. Caleb stood in front of her. "Why?" Diane wiped her face. "Because your mother always made me feel small." Caleb stared at her. That was not the answer he expected. Diane laughed through tears. She had nothing. Nothing. And still people trusted her more than me. She was poor, but she walked like she had a crown. I hated her for that. Caleb whispered, "So you let them destroy her?" Diane looked at the ground. "I thought they would scare her. I didn't know." Caleb cut her off. "You knew enough." Diane broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. She folded into herself like a house finally collapsing. That evening, after the police had come, after the news vans had left, after Pastor Monroe and Harlan were taken away for questioning, Caleb went back inside the house alone. The tin sat on the floor beside him. Only one thing remained unopened: the letter. For 22 years he had wanted the truth. Now he had it, and still His chest felt hollow, because truth can clear a name, but it cannot bring back a mother. Caleb opened the letter carefully. The paper smelled like smoke and time. Ruth had written, "My sweet Caleb, if you are reading this, then I am sorry I could not protect you longer. I know people may tell you many things about me. They may say I was a thief. They may say I was trouble. They may say I brought shame on myself. Do not let their lies become your mirror. You are not the son of a thief. You are the son of a woman who tried to stand straight in a crooked town." Caleb stopped reading. His tears fell onto the page. Then he continued, "I need you to promise me something. If the truth ever comes out, do not let hate raise you again. Hate is another kind of prison. Tell the truth, clear my name, then walk away free. And if that house is still standing, remember this. It did not bury me. It kept my voice safe for you. I love you more than this world was kind to me. Mom." The following Sunday, Grace Road Church was full for the first time in years. But Pastor Monroe was not at the pulpit. His chair was empty. The church board had removed his name from the sign outside. The old donation box was gone. At the front of the church stood a photograph of Ruth Turner, not as a warning, not as gossip, not as shame, as a woman who had told the truth and paid for it. One by one, people stood to apologize. Some cried. Some confessed they had repeated lies. Some admitted they had seen Ruth suffer and done nothing. Some said they were sorry to Caleb. Caleb listened from the back. He did not smile. Apologies are strange things. They often arrive after the person who needed them most is already gone. When they asked Caleb to speak, he walked to the front slowly. He looked at the pew where his mother used to sit. Then he said, "My mother did not need this church to make her holy. She was already honest when you called her dirty." The church went silent. Caleb placed Ruth's letter on the pulpit. "I forgive what I can. The law can handle the rest." Then he walked out. A week later, Caleb had the house taken down. Not because he hated it, because it had finished speaking. The workers removed the last walls carefully. The kitchen cabinet was saved. The porch beam was saved. The tin was preserved as evidence. The rest came down into dust. People gathered across the road, but no one laughed this time. They watched silently as the house that carried Ruth's secret for 22 years finally collapsed. Caleb stood alone, holding his mother's photograph. For most of his life, he thought the house had taken her from him. Now he understood. The house had protected what the town tried to bury. It had held her voice in its burned ribs. It had waited for her son. It had remembered. Months later, something new stood at the end of Mill Road. Not a mansion, not a memorial statue, not another abandoned building. A small food pantry. White walls, blue door, warm lights. Shelves full of food, a room for winter coats, a small office where families could ask for help without shame. Caleb named it the Ruth Turner House of Mercy. The first winter it opened, more than 60 families came through its doors. Some were children of people who had once mocked Ruth. Some were grandchildren of church members who had called her a thief. Some were strangers who knew nothing about the fire. Caleb did not turn them away, because Ruth had asked him not to let hate raise him again. And for the first time in 22 years, the end of Mill Road did not look cursed. It looked like a beginning. People say houses cannot talk, but some houses remember. They remember the hands that cleaned them, the children who cried inside them, the secrets hidden behind their walls. The lies whispered in their rooms, the names the world tried to erase. Ruth Turner died with a town calling her a thief, but the truth waited, in a burned wall, in a rusted tin, in a mother's voice, in a son who came back not to buy a house, but to free the woman buried inside its story. And maybe that is what justice really is. Not always revenge, not always shouting, not always destroying everyone who hurt you. Sometimes justice is opening the wall, letting the truth breathe, and building mercy where pain used to live. This was the Dustline. If this story kept you watching until the end, subscribe to the channel, because some stories are buried deep, and we are here to bring them back into the light.